For most of my life, I believed that being called the strong one was a compliment. But it wasn't until much later that I realized my parents only loved me because a strong daughter is a convenient daughter. My name is Erin Caldwell. I am 30 years old and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I work as a respiratory therapist at one of the largest hospital systems in the city. It is a career built entirely on the concept of breathing, on keeping people alive when their own bodies forget how to do the most basic human function. My days are spent managing ventilators, monitoring oxygen levels, and holding the hands of patients who are terrified because they cannot catch their breath. I make $82,000 a year. I have a solid employer health insurance plan, a retirement account I contribute to every month, and an emergency savings fund that I guard with my life. Before the accident, I had saved $44,000. I also had a credit score hovering around 770. I was not rich by any means, but I was secure. I had built a fortress of stability around myself, brick by brick, shift by shift, because I learned very early on that if I fell, no one in my family was going to catch me. My brother Mason is 33 years old. If I was the family foundation, Mason was the fireworks display. He is charismatic, highly social, and effortlessly charming. Growing up, he was the child who needed things. He needed sports camps, he needed private tutoring, he needed social events, and he needed endless financial runway for his various career ambitions. Every time our family resources ran thin, my parents, David and Marlene, made a choice. They chose Mason. Their justification was always the same. They would say that Erin will understand. They would say that Erin always figures things out on her own. They would say that Mason just needs the opportunity more. I never fought them on it. I hated conflict, and more than that, I hated the idea of appearing jealous. I told myself that they were right. I was doing okay. I did not need their help, so it made sense for them to focus on the child who was struggling. I rationalized their favoritism for 3 decades. I convinced myself that their neglect was actually a form of respect. I told myself they needed me less because I was capable. 3 weeks before the car crash that changed everything, I met my parents and Mason for dinner at a mid-tier Italian restaurant in the suburbs. It was a Thursday night. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, but my mother had insisted we all get together to celebrate Mason's latest milestone. Mason was in the process of opening an upscale sports bar and restaurant called the Yard House Social. It was his biggest venture yet, and my parents were treating it like the crowning achievement of the Caldwell family. I arrived at the restaurant wearing my scrubs, my badge still clipped to my pocket. The 3 of them were already seated at a booth near the window. My father, David, was a regional sales manager who had spent his life talking about investments, opportunities, and family responsibility. He had a glass of wine in his hand and was leaning forward, hanging on Mason's every word. My mother, Marlene, sat next to him. She worked as an office administrator for a dental practice, a job that made her meticulous with paperwork but surprisingly blind to the emotional dynamics of her own children. I slid into the booth next to Mason. He gave me a bright, easy smile and clapped me on the shoulder. He looked good. He was wearing a tailored button-down shirt and a designer watch that I knew he could not afford on his own. "There she is," my father said, raising his glass slightly. "The hardest working girl in Columbus. How was the hospital, Erin?" "It was fine," I said, reaching for a menu. "We had a lot of admissions today from the sudden weather change, but it was manageable." "That is great, honey," my mother said, completely glossing over my answer. "You have to look at Mason's new floor plans. They just got the permits approved for the patio expansion." Mason pulled a tablet out of his leather messenger bag and slid it across the table. I looked at the digital renderings. They were beautiful. The Yard House Social looked like the kind of place that charged $18 for a cocktail. There were leather booths, a massive wraparound bar, and industrial lighting. "It looks incredible, Mason," I said honestly. "When is the target opening date?" "We are aiming for the end of next month," Mason said, his eyes shining with excitement. "We still have a few vendor contracts to finalize, and the commercial kitchen equipment delivery got delayed, but we are right on the edge." "This is going to be huge, Erin. The foot traffic projections in that neighborhood are insane." My father nodded proudly. He has really put the work in. We are all pushing to get this across the finish line. It is a family effort. I knew exactly what family effort meant. Over the past 2 years, my parents had poured a massive chunk of their own savings into Mason's restaurant. They had co-signed on leases, provided cash for equipment deposits, and essentially become his primary investors. They were terrified of losing the money they had already put in, which meant they were trapped by the sunk cost. Every time Mason ran into a financial hurdle, my parents panicked and threw more money at the problem to protect their initial investment. I ordered a simple pasta dish and listened as they spent the next hour discussing marketing strategies, menu tastings, and VIP opening night guest lists. I was happy for him, truly. I wanted Mason to succeed. But I also felt the familiar, quiet ache of being the audience to his life. No one asked me about my plans to buy a townhouse. No one asked how my savings were going, or if I had found a real estate agent yet. My life was considered stable, which in my family meant it was considered boring. Towards the end of the meal, when Mason went to the restroom, the atmosphere at the table shifted. My father cleared his throat and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Erin," he said, using the serious, practical tone he always used when he was about to ask for something, "I am glad we have a second alone. Your mother and I ran into a bit of a cash flow issue this week. I put my fork down. What happened?" "It is nothing major," my mother chimed in quickly. "Just a bad string of luck. The furnace at the house needs a complete replacement. The repair guy said it is a fire hazard if we keep running it. It is going to cost about $4,000, and with all our liquid cash tied up in the final stages of the restaurant, we are a little strapped until the end of the month." "We hate to ask," my father said, not looking like he hated it at all. "But could you float us $3,000? Just to cover the bulk of the installation? We will pay you back as soon as my quarterly bonus comes through in 6 weeks." I looked at them. This was a familiar routine. Over the past 3 years, I had transferred money to them for various emergencies: a roof repair here, a medical deductible there, a temporary shortage on property taxes. I always said yes. I rationalized it by telling myself they had raised me, they were my parents, and I had the money sitting in my savings account. It was usually just a few $1,000s at a time. I never questioned the reasons they gave me. Why would they lie about a broken furnace? 3,000, I repeated, calculating the impact on my townhouse fund. It would set my timeline back a month or two, but it would not ruin me. "You know we are good for it," my father said, "and you have always been so disciplined with your money, Erin. You are the only one in the family who actually plans ahead. We really appreciate it." There it was, the validation. They were praising my responsibility while actively penalizing me for it. But I was so conditioned to accept those crumbs of approval that I nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. "I can transfer it tomorrow morning when the bank opens." My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, sweetie. You are always our rock. You never make a fuss." Mason returned to the table a moment later, completely unaware of the transaction that had just taken place. Or at least, I assumed he was unaware. We finished dessert, paid the bill, and went our separate ways. I transferred the $3,000 to my parents the next morning. I did not ask for a receipt from the HVAC company. I just went to work, did my job, and continued being the rock they required me to be. 2 weeks later, the illusion I had built around my family shattered. It was a Tuesday night in late April. The weather in Columbus had been miserable all day, a heavy, relentless spring rain that made the roads slick and the visibility terrible. I was off duty, spending the evening doing laundry at my apartment when my phone rang. It was Mason. "Hey, Erin," he said, sounding stressed. "I know this is incredibly last minute, but can you do me a massive favor?" "What is wrong?" I asked, pinning the phone between my ear and my shoulder as I folded a towel. "My business partner is stuck in Cleveland with family stuff, and I have to go look at the custom bar stools for the restaurant tonight. The vendor is closing his warehouse tomorrow for a month-long vacation, and if I do not approve the physical samples tonight, our opening gets pushed back by 3 weeks. My car is in the shop for a transmission issue, and Mom and Dad are at some neighborhood association meeting." "You need a ride?" I asked. "I have an Uber to get there," he said quickly. but the warehouse is way out in the industrial park on the west side. Getting a ride back at 9 at night in the pouring rain is going to be impossible, or it will cost me $100. Could you just come out there and pick me up? Or, wait, better idea. I will pick you up in my rental car, we can go look at the stools together, and then I will drop you back home. I just need a second opinion on the upholstery anyway. You have good taste. He was stressed, he was asking for my help, and I was the responsible sister. I told him I would be ready in 20 minutes. Mason picked me up in a mid-sized rental sedan. He looked exhausted, rubbing his temples as we drove out toward the industrial park. We spent an hour at the dimly lit warehouse, looking at leather swatches and testing the stability of iron bar stools. I gave him my honest opinions, he made his choices, and he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as he finalized the paperwork with the vendor. "Thanks for coming out here, Erin," he said, as we walked back to the rental car, our jackets pulled tight against the freezing rain. "I know it is not how you wanted to spend your night off." "It is fine, Mason," I said, getting into the passenger seat. "You are almost at the finish line. It will all be worth it when the doors open." "I hope so," he said, starting the engine and turning the heater on high. "Mom and Dad have so much riding on this. If it fails, I think it might actually destroy them financially. The pressure is insane." I wanted to tell him that they were adults who made their own investment choices, but I stayed quiet. I did not want to add to his anxiety. We pulled out of the industrial park and onto the main arterial road, heading back toward the city. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the streetlights into smeared halos against the windshield. Mason was driving carefully, his hands at 10 and 2, the windshield wipers on their highest setting. The radio was playing softly in the background. We were approaching the intersection of a major highway bypass. Our light was solid green. Mason did not even tap the brakes as we moved into the intersection. I did not see the headlights until they were already inside the passenger window. There was no time to scream, there was no time to brace myself. There was only a blinding flash of light, followed by a sound so loud it felt like it tore the air inside the car in half. It was the horrific, metallic crunch of 2 tons of steel folding in on itself. The other driver had run the red light going at least 50 miles an hour. His truck slammed directly into the passenger side of our rental car right where I was sitting. The impact threw the car across the intersection. We spun wildly, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt. Glass shattered inward, a storm of sharp rain and jagged edges. I felt a sudden crushing weight slam into my right side. My head snapped violently, bouncing off the window frame before the airbag deployed, punching me in the face with the smell of burnt chemicals and hot dust. When the car finally stopped spinning, it slammed into a concrete light pole on my side, crushing the door further inward. Then there was silence. The silence lasted for perhaps 3 seconds before my ears started ringing, a high-pitched, deafening whine that drowned out the sound of the rain. I tried to open my eyes. Everything was blurry, painted in strange shadows from the broken streetlights. I tried to take a breath, and a wave of agony so pure and absolute ripped through my torso that my vision completely blacked out for a second. It felt like someone had driven a spike through my right hip and into my stomach. I was a medical professional. I had seen trauma patients. My brain bypassed panic and went straight into clinical assessment. My right side was crushed. Breathing was difficult, meaning rib damage or lung compromise. The pain in my lower abdomen was radiating, hot and deep. Pelvic fracture. Possible internal bleeding. Erin. The voice was faint, muffled by the ringing in my ears. Erin, oh my God, Erin. I turned my head an inch to the left. Mason was slumped over the steering wheel, but he was moving. He pushed himself back, his face pale and smeared with a small amount of blood from a cut on his forehead. He was holding his left wrist against his chest, his face twisted in pain. "Mason," I tried to say, but it came out as a wet, ragged wheeze. "Do not move," he panicked, his voice trembling. "Do not move, Erin. I am calling 911. My phone, where is my phone?" I closed my eyes. I could feel a strange cold dampness pooling against my right leg. The pain in my pelvis was escalating, transforming from a sharp stab into a sickening grinding pressure every time my heart beat. I focused entirely on taking shallow, controlled breaths. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. Sirens bled into the night air. The response time was fast. Within minutes, the intersection was bathed in the harsh, rotating red and blue lights of police cruisers and ambulances. Paramedics swarmed the car. I heard a voice yelling to bring the jaws of life. The passenger door was caved in completely, pinning my lower body against the center console. I remember the horrific sound of metal being torn apart. I remember the cold rain hitting my face when they finally ripped the door off its hinges. A paramedic with a yellow jacket leaned in, shining a penlight into my eyes. "I am right here with you, honey," the paramedic said. "What is your name?" "Erin," I whispered. "Pelvis is crushed. Pain in right quadrant. Hard to breathe." The paramedic looked at me, surprised by my clinical language, then immediately yelled over his shoulder. "We have a suspected pelvic fracture and potential internal bleeding. Get the backboard. We need to move her now." They pulled me from the wreckage. The movement caused a spike of pain so intense that I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in the back of an ambulance. The siren was screaming above me. An IV was already in my arm and someone was pushing fluids. I looked down and saw my scrubs had been cut open. "Blood pressure is dropping," a voice said sharply. 80/50. Heart rate is 130. She is bleeding inside. Call ahead to the trauma bay, tell them we are 3 minutes out and need an oar ready. I stared at the ceiling of the ambulance. I knew exactly what those numbers meant. I was going into hypovolemic shock. I closed my eyes and for a brief, terrifying moment, I wondered if I was going to die. I thought of my parents. I wondered who would call them. I hoped Mason was okay. The arrival at the emergency room was a blur of frantic motion and shouting. I was transferred to a trauma bed, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses cutting away the rest of my clothes, attaching monitors and pressing on my abdomen. I recognized the layout of the room. It was not my hospital, it was the Level 1 trauma center across town, but the protocol was the same. Blunt force trauma to the right side, the attending physician called out. Imaging shows a severe right pelvic ring fracture and free fluid in the abdomen. We need to get her up to surgery right now to find the bleed. A nurse leaned over my face. "Erin? Erin, can you hear me? We are taking you up to surgery. You are going to go to sleep now. Do you have family we can call?" "My parents," I managed to say. "David and Marlene Caldwell. My brother Mason was driving." "Is he here?" "Your brother was brought in the second ambulance," the nurse assured me softly. "He is medically stable. We are calling your parents right now." Someone pushed medication into my IV line. The bright lights of the trauma bay blurred, smeared into long white lines as they rolled my bed down the hallway, and then everything went completely dark. I woke up to the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a ventilator. I did not open my eyes immediately. I lay there in the sterile darkness of my own mind, cataloging the sensations in my body. The deep, crushing agony in my pelvis had been replaced by a heavy chemical numbness. My ribs ached with every breath. My throat was raw. I realized I was not on a ventilator, but I was wearing a high-flow oxygen mask. The hissing sound was coming from the wall unit. I slowly forced my eyelids open. The lights were dim. I was in a private room in the surgical intensive care unit. The clock on the wall read 3:15 in the morning. A nurse was standing by the monitors, adjusting an IV pump. When she saw my eyes open, she smiled gently and stepped over to the bed. "Welcome back, Erin," she said softly. "I am Chloe. I am your ICU nurse. You have been through a lot." I reached up with a heavy hand and pulled the oxygen mask down slightly so I could speak. My voice was a gravelly whisper. "Surgery? You were in surgery for 4 hours," Chloe explained, checking my vitals. "You had a lacerated spleen causing internal bleeding, which they repaired. You also have a complex fracture of your right pelvis and 3 broken ribs. They had to put pins in your pelvis to stabilize it. You are going to be non-weight-bearing on that right side for quite a while." I absorbed the medical information. Spleen repaired, pelvis pinned, non-weight-bearing. I was looking at weeks of recovery, maybe months of physical therapy. My townhouse timeline was instantly destroyed. My savings would take a massive hit from the medical deductible and the lost wages once my paid time off ran out. Then, the emotional reality hit me. "My family," I said, looking toward the empty visitor chair in the corner of the room. The room was silent except for the machines. "Did you call them? Are they here?" Chloe's expression shifted slightly. It was a subtle tightening around the corners of her mouth, a look I recognized because I had given it to patients before. It was the look a medical professional gives when they have to deliver awkward social news. "Your parents are here at the hospital," Chloe said carefully. "They arrived about an hour after you went into surgery." "Where are they?" I asked. A cold feeling started to spread in my chest that had nothing to do with the IV fluids. Chloe looked down at her charting tablet. "They are down on the 4th floor, in the observation unit." I stared at her, my brain sluggish from the painkillers. "Why are they in observation? Are they not allowed in the ICU?" "They are allowed," Chloe said gently. "But your brother Mason is in the observation unit. He suffered a mild concussion and a fractured left wrist in the crash. They kept him overnight just for neurochecks because of the head bump. Your parents went down there to sit with him while you were in surgery. When you got out, the surgical resident went down to tell them you were stable and in recovery." I waited for the rest of the sentence. I waited for her to say, "And they are on their way up here right now." She did not say it. "They know I am awake?" I asked. "I called the nurse down on the 4th floor about 20 minutes ago to let them know you were showing signs of waking up," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a tone of quiet pity. "The nurse said your parents were trying to get your brother to sleep, and that they would come up as soon as he was settled." I looked away from Chloe, staring blankly at the beige wall of the hospital room. I had almost died. I had been rushed into emergency surgery for internal bleeding. I had a crushed pelvis. I was lying in an intensive care unit hooked up to monitors and pain pumps. My brother had a fractured wrist and a mild concussion. He was in a standard observation bed, and my parents chose to sit with him. They were in the same building. They were an elevator ride away. They had been told their daughter just survived major trauma surgery, and their response was that they needed to get my 33-year-old brother to sleep first. "Would you like me to call down there again?" Chloe asked gently. "No," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Do not call them. It is fine." Chloe looked like she wanted to say something else, but she just nodded, adjusted my blanket, and quietly left the room. I lay there in the silence, listening to the beep of my own heart rate. I did not cry. Crying would have hurt my broken ribs, but more than that, I did not feel sad. I felt an incredible, crystalline clarity. The rationalizations I had used for 30 years were dissolving in the sterile air of the ICU. They did not stay with Mason because he needed them more. Mason was perfectly safe in an observation unit surrounded by nurses. He was not in danger. They stayed with Mason because he was the center of their universe, and I was just the satellite. I was the strong one. I was the one who could handle waking up alone in the ICU after a near-death experience. My parents finally walked into my room at 7 o'clock in the morning. The sun was just starting to peek through the window blinds. I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The door clicked open, and David and Marlene Caldwell walked in. They looked tired, holding styrofoam cups of hospital coffee. My mother rushed over to the side of the bed, her face pulled into a mask of maternal concern that felt entirely performative. "Oh, Erin, honey," she gasped, reaching out to touch my arm, carefully avoiding the IV lines. "Look at you. We were so worried. The doctor said you had to have surgery." "My spleen was bleeding," I said, my voice flat, "and my pelvis is fractured." "Thank God you are okay," my father said, standing at the foot of the bed. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his face. "What a nightmare of a night. We have been up for hours." "How is Mason?" I asked. I did not ask because I was desperate to know. I asked because I wanted to see how quickly they would take the bait. My mother's face instantly shifted from performative concern to genuine, animated distress. "Oh, poor Mason. He is just a wreck, Erin. His left wrist is fractured, which means he is going to have to wear a cast for 6 weeks, right when the restaurant is supposed to be doing final prep, and the concussion has him so dizzy and anxious. The accident really spooked him." "It was a heavy hit," my father added, shaking his head. "The doctor down there said he needs complete rest. No stress, no screens. We are just so thankful he was not hurt worse. The airbag really saved him." I looked from my father to my mother. I waited for them to ask about my pain. I waited for them to ask what the surgeon had said about my recovery time. I waited for them to ask how I felt when the car was crushed around me. So, my mother said, looking at the monitors and then down at her watch. The nurse said you are stable now, which is just wonderful news. You have always been so tough, Erin, bouncing right back. I have metal pins in my bones, Mom, I said quietly. I cannot walk. She waved her hand dismissively, offering a tight smile. You know what I mean. You are strong. You are going to heal up perfectly. You are young and healthy. The reason we popped up right now is that the doctor down on 4 just cleared Mason for discharge. He is incredibly anxious and wants to go home, but with the concussion, he really cannot be alone right now. My father nodded in agreement. Your mother and I are going to take him back to his place and get him settled. Make sure he eats something and gets some sleep. We will come back and check on you later tonight, okay? Or tomorrow morning at the latest. You are in great hands here. They were leaving. I had been out of major surgery for a few hours, unable to move my lower body, and they were leaving me in the hospital to go tuck my adult brother into his own bed because he was anxious. A younger version of myself would have made excuses for them. The responsible daughter would have smiled, told them not to worry, and said that I was perfectly fine on my own. I would have protected them from the guilt of abandoning me. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I felt the heavy chemical warmth of the pain medication in my blood, but my mind was terrifyingly sharp. Okay, I said. That was it. Just one word. I did not smile. I did not tell them I was fine. I did not relieve them of their burden. My mother looked slightly uncomfortable with my lack of reassurance, but she eagerly took the out I gave her. Okay, great. We love you, sweetie. Call us if you need anything, but just know we might have our phones on silent so Mason can rest. Goodbye, my father said, patting the foot of my bed. They turned and walked out the door. The latch clicked shut behind them. I was alone again. I spent the next 3 days in the hospital. I was moved from the surgical ICU to a standard trauma recovery floor on the second day. The physical pain was immense, an agonizing, grueling process of learning how to shift my weight without screaming, how to sit up, how to use a bedpan because I was not allowed to put any weight on my right leg. My parents did not come back that evening. They did not come back the next morning. Instead, my phone buzzed with updates in the family group chat. My mother had added my aunts, uncles, and cousins to a thread to keep everyone informed. I sat in my hospital bed, reading the messages as they rolled in. Marlene, just got Mason home. He is resting. The wrist fracture is really painful for him, and he is so stressed about the restaurant timeline. Please keep him in your prayers, Aunt Susan. Poor Mason, sending so much love. How is Erin? David. Erin had some surgery, but she is tough as nails. The doctors say she is stable. You know Erin, she never lets anything keep her down for long. We are focusing on keeping Mason calm right now to avoid post-concussion syndrome. They were using my strength as a shield to protect themselves from judgment. By telling the extended family that I was tough as legals, they were giving themselves permission to ignore me completely. On the afternoon of the second day, the door to my room opened, and Naomi Brooks walked in. Naomi was 32, a fellow respiratory therapist who worked the opposite shift as me. We were work friends who occasionally grabbed coffee, not lifelong best friends, but we respected each other. She was wearing her scrubs, having just finished her shift upstairs in the pulmonary wing. She was carrying a massive tote bag. Hey, she said, stopping at the foot of the bed. She looked at the bruising on my face, the IV lines, and the bulky brace stabilizing my pelvis. Her eyes softened with professional understanding and personal anger. Word travels fast in this hospital system. I saw your name on the trauma board yesterday. Hi, Naomi, I said, managing a weak smile. She walked over and started unpacking the tote bag on the small rolling table. I brought you real shampoo, dry shampoo for when you cannot stand, your favorite lip balm because hospital air is a crime against humanity, and a charger with a 10-foot cord so you do not have to twist your spine to reach the wall outlet. I looked at the items on the table. It was such a simple gesture, so practical and thoughtful, that it hit me harder than the car crash. A coworker who I only saw in the break room had thought about the logistics of my comfort more than my own parents had. Thank you. I choked out, a sudden lump forming in my throat. Naomi pulled up a chair and sat down. Where is your family, Erin? The nurse's station said you have not had any visitors since yesterday morning. I looked down at my hands. My brother was in the car with me. He broke his wrist and got a concussion. My parents are at his house taking care of him. Naomi stared at me, her eyebrows pulling together in utter confusion. He broke his wrist? Erin, you have a pinned pelvis and a repaired spleen. You cannot walk to the bathroom by yourself. I know, I said quietly. And they left you here alone to go baby a grown man with a broken wrist? Naomi's voice raised slightly, her protective instincts flaring. They think I am strong, I said, repeating the family mantra. They think I can handle it. Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Erin, being strong does not mean you are supposed to be left alone when you are broken in half. That is not strength, that is neglect. Hearing someone else say it out loud validated the cold realization I had in the ICU. I was not crazy, I was not being overly sensitive. What my parents were doing was objectively wrong. I know, I said, my voice hardening. I am starting to realize that. Naomi stayed with me for an hour. She helped me brush my hair, she filled my water pitcher, and she talked to me about hospital gossip to distract me from the pain. Before she left, she looked at me seriously. When do they think they are going to discharge you? She asked. Tomorrow afternoon if my blood work looks good, I replied. I have to use a walker, and I cannot put weight on my right side for 6 weeks. Who is picking you up? I hesitated. I had assumed I would call my parents. I had assumed they would at least come to drive me home. But looking at the group chat, looking at the empty room, I knew exactly how that phone call would go. My mother would act flustered. She would say Mason was sleeping, or Mason needed his medication, and ask if I could just take a medical transport van. I do not know, I said honestly. I am picking you up, Naomi said firmly, leaving no room for argument. I am off tomorrow. I will be here at 2 o'clock. I will take you to your apartment and I am going to stay with you for the first few days until you figure out a routine. I already cleared it with my landlord to be away from my place. Naomi, you do not have to do that. That is too much. Stop it, she interrupted. Stop doing that. Stop acting like you have to do everything by yourself. You let me help you. It is decided. She left, and I was alone again. But this time the isolation did not feel like abandonment. It felt like an opportunity. The next day discharge went exactly as planned. My parents sent one text message around noon. Marlene, thinking of you today, Erin. Hope the doctors let you go home soon. Mason had a rough night, with headaches, so we are keeping the house dark and quiet today. Let us know when you get settled at your place. Love you. They did not even ask how I was getting home. They just assumed the strong daughter would figure it out. And I did. Naomi arrived at 2 o'clock, just as promised. She navigated the hospital bureaucracy, grabbed my discharge paperwork, and bullied a hospital orderly into finding the most comfortable wheelchair on the floor. She drove my car, carefully helping me transfer from the wheelchair into the passenger seat. Every movement was a terrifying battle against the pain in my pelvis, but Naomi was patient, guiding me exactly how a medical professional should. When we got to my apartment, she helped me up the single flight of stairs. It took 20 minutes. By the time I collapsed onto my own couch, I was shaking from exertion and covered in a cold sweat. Naomi immediately went to work. She set up my walker, organized my prescription medications on the coffee table, filled a water bottle, and started pulling blankets out of the hall closet to make a nest on the couch, since getting into my actual bed was going to be too difficult. You need anything right now? She asked, putting a bottle of painkillers next to my water. Food? Ice pack? Just my laptop, please, I said, pointing to the desk in the corner of the living room. I need to check some things. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You just got discharged from a major trauma admission. Work emails can wait, Erin. It is not work, I said. She brought me the laptop, plugged in the charger, and set it on my lap. Then she went into the kitchen to start making dinner. I opened the laptop. The apartment was quiet, smelling faintly of the lavender cleaner I used before the accident. I sat on my couch, my body broken, my family absent, and I felt a profound, fundamental shift in my psychology. For 30 years, I had allowed my parents to treat my competence as an excuse to exploit me. I had allowed them to take my time, my emotional bandwidth, and my money, all while feeding me the lie that I was simply too strong to need their care. I was not going to be their shock absorber anymore. If I was going to be entirely on my own, then I was going to secure my own life. I needed to know exactly how much damage this accident was going to do to my finances. I needed to calculate my insurance deductibles, my lost wages, and see how much of my townhouse fund I was going to have to sacrifice to survive the next 2 months. I logged into my health insurance portal. I reviewed the preliminary claims from the hospital. The numbers were staggering, but my out-of-pocket maximum would protect me from complete ruin. I would survive this. I always survived. Next, I opened a new tab and logged into my primary bank account. I needed to see exactly how much liquid cash I had remaining after I had transferred that $3,000 to my parents for their supposed furnace repair. I typed in my username, I typed in my password. The portal loaded, displaying my dashboard, checking account, savings account. And below that, in the section reserved for credit cards and external liabilities, there was an alert. It was a small red flag icon next to my credit monitoring service, a free feature provided by the bank. Alert, new account reported to credit bureau. Status, delinquent. I frowned, adjusting my position on the couch, wincing as a spike of pain shot through my hip. A delinquent account? I did not have any delinquent accounts. I paid my one credit card off in full every month. I paid my car loan on time. I was meticulous with my finances because my credit score was the key to buying my townhouse. I clicked on the alert. The page redirected to my full credit report summary. There, sitting ugly and glaring under the new account section, was a commercial financing line. Lender, Apex Commercial Capital. Account type, Business Liability Guarantor. Opened 7 months ago. Original amount $65,000. Current balance $48,240. Status 30 days past due. I stared at the screen. The numbers blurred, then snapped back into sharp focus. $65,000. Commercial financing. I had never taken out a commercial loan in my life. I had never guaranteed a business liability. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy thud against my broken ribs. I looked at the date the account was opened. 7 months ago. That was exactly when Mason was securing the lease and initial equipment orders for the Yard House Social. I clicked on the detailed view of the account. It listed my name, Erin Caldwell, as the primary guarantor. The mailing address associated with the account was not my apartment. It was my parents' address, the house I had moved out of 8 years ago. A cold, creeping horror spread through my chest, entirely replacing the physical pain of my injuries. They did not just take my emotional support. They did not just take the small cash transfers I willingly gave them. When Mason needed money for his restaurant, when my parents were too overextended to qualify for more loans themselves, they had used my name. They had used my spotless credit, my social security number, and my clean financial history to secretly secure a massive commercial loan for his business. And they had hidden the paperwork by sending it to their own house. I sat alone in my living room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the bruises on my face. The family I had spent my life protecting from conflict had not just abandoned me in a hospital. They had actively, deliberately stolen my financial identity to fund the golden child. Naomi walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at my face, the absolute stillness in my posture. "Erin?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "What is it? Are you hurting?" I looked away from the screen, turning my head to look at the woman who had actually shown up for me. I felt the last lingering threads of the responsible daughter, the girl who always understood, snap cleanly in half. "No, Naomi," I said, my voice eerily calm, the voice of a woman who had just found the bottom of the ocean and realized she could still breathe. "I am not hurting anymore." I closed the laptop slowly, the soft click of the screen meeting the keyboard echoing in the quiet apartment. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't feel the frantic, hyperventilating panic that usually accompanies a betrayal of this magnitude. Instead, I felt a deep, freezing calm settle into the marrow of my bones. It was the sensation of a final thread snapping, severing me completely from the illusion I had maintained for 30 years. Naomi took a step forward, her brow furrowed. "Erin, you're scaring me a little. You look like you just watched someone die. What did you find on that computer?" I looked at her, registering the genuine concern in her eyes. It was a stark contrast to the performative worry my mother had displayed in the hospital. I didn't want to dump the entire weight of my family's dysfunction on her right now, especially not when she had just spent hours navigating my physical transfer from the hospital. I found a discrepancy, I said quietly, keeping my voice level. In my finances, it's something I need to handle. A discrepancy? Naomi echoed, clearly not buying the understatement. People don't look like they've been struck by lightning over a banking error. Naomi, I said, my voice softening just enough to show my gratitude. I promise I will explain it to you, but right now I have a very small window of adrenaline masking my pain medication, and I need to do a few things before I lose focus. Could you bring me my purse? It should be in the bag of personal items they sent from the hospital. She stared at me for a long moment, assessing my mental state. Whatever she saw in my face convinced her to drop the interrogation. She nodded, walked over to the hospital bag sitting by the front door, and retrieved my leather tote. She set it on the coffee table within my reach. I'm going to warm up the soup I brought, she said, giving me space. You have 20 minutes before I force you to eat and take your next dose of painkillers. Thank you, I said. As soon as she disappeared into the small kitchen, I opened the laptop again. I pulled my wallet from my purse and took out my debit card, my credit card, and my driver's license. I laid them out on the table like weapons. If my parents had taken out a $65,000 commercial loan in my name 7 months ago, it meant they had access to everything. They knew my social security number by heart. My mother had kept all our birth certificates and tax documents in a fireproof lockbox in their home office. They knew my banking institution. They knew my annual salary, and most dangerously, they knew the answers to my security questions. When you grow up in a tight-knit suburban family, your security questions are essentially public knowledge. What is your mother's maiden name? What was the name of your first pet? What street did you grow up on? What was the make of your first car? My parents knew all of these answers. They were the ones who had bought the golden retriever named Buster. They had lived on Maplewood Drive. They had helped me buy the used Honda Civic. My digital life was protected by locks they had the keys to. I started with the credit bureaus. I opened 3 new tabs for Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. My fingers flew across the keyboard, driven by a cold, mechanical efficiency. I created accounts, verified my identity, and initiated a hard freeze on my credit profile across all 3 platforms. A credit freeze meant no one, not a bank, not a car dealership, and certainly not an alternative commercial lender, could pull my credit report or open a new account in my name. Once the freezes were confirmed, I moved to my bank accounts. I changed my passwords, replacing the familiar variations of my birth year and childhood address with complex strings of alphanumeric nonsense. Then I went into the security settings and changed the recovery questions. What is your mother's maiden name? I typed. Unrelated. What was the name of your first pet? I typed. Exploitation. What city were you born in? I typed. Nothing. I locked them out. I systematically moved through my retirement account portal, my health insurance dashboard, and my auto loan servicer. I severed every digital tie, every shared piece of history that could be weaponized against me. I removed my old childhood home as my secondary mailing address. I deleted the shared family email account from my recovery options. By the time Naomi walked back into the living room with a steaming bowl of chicken soup and a small paper cup holding my pain medication, I had built an impenetrable digital wall around my life. Eat, she commanded gently, setting the tray on my lap. I ate the soup. I swallowed the pills. And then, as the heavy narcotic warmth began to spread through my blood, dragging me toward sleep, I leaned my head back against the couch cushions. The physical pain in my crushed pelvis was a dull, constant roar, but my mind was utterly silent. I had taken the first step. I was no longer the family safety net. I was a vault. The next 4 days were a grueling tutorial in the limits of the human body. Recovering from a severe pelvic fracture in a second-floor apartment is a deeply humbling experience. I was entirely non-weight-bearing on my right side. Every movement required a complex, agonizing calculation of leverage and balance. Getting from the couch to the bathroom with the aluminum walker took 10 minutes and left me drenched in a cold sweat. Showering was impossible. I relied on sponge baths and dry shampoo. Naomi stayed for the first 3 days. She was a force of nature, anticipating my needs before I even voiced them. She managed my medication schedule, prepped meals in Tupperware containers, and made sure all my essentials were within arm's reach of my nest on the couch. During those days, my phone remained relatively quiet. The family group chat buzzed occasionally, a curated feed of Mason's recovery, Marlene. Mason had a follow-up with the orthopedist today. They adjusted his cast. He's being such a trooper, but he's so worried about the restaurant opening. David. The boy has heart. We spent the morning going over vendor invoices, just keeping everything moving forward. Aunt Susan, so glad he's doing well. Is Erin home from the hospital yet? Marlene. Yes, she's home resting. You know Erin, very independent. Read the messages and felt absolutely nothing. They were strangers to me now. They were people who lived in a different reality, a reality where they were the devoted, supportive parents of a struggling entrepreneur, and I was merely an afterthought who occasionally provided capital. On the morning of my 5th day home, Naomi had to go back to work. She stood by the front door, looking at me with hesitation. I have my phone on me at all times, she said, pointing a finger at me. If you drop something, leave it. If you feel dizzy, sit down. The home physical therapist is coming at 2 o'clock. I will be back by 7 with takeout. Do not try to be a hero today, Erin. I will be perfectly fine, Naomi, I said, managing a genuine smile. Thank you for everything. Once she left, the apartment settled into a heavy, unbroken silence. I carefully maneuvered myself into a seated position on the couch, pulling my laptop onto my lap. It was time to pull the thread. I had frozen my credit, which stopped any future bleeding. But I needed to understand the exact anatomy of the wound they had already inflicted. I needed the documentation for the Apex Commercial Capital loan. I found the customer service number on the credit report alert and dialed. I was routed through an automated system before finally being connected to a representative in the commercial lending division. Thank you for calling Apex Commercial Capital. My name is Marcus. How can I help you today? Hi, Marcus. My name is Erin Caldwell. I'm calling regarding an account that recently appeared on my credit report. I believe there has been an error or potentially fraudulent activity, as I have never applied for commercial financing. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing clicking over the line. I can certainly look into that for you, Ms. Caldwell. For security purposes, I'll need to verify some information. Can you provide the social security number associated with the account? I gave him my number. He asked for my date of birth, which I provided. Okay, I see the account here, Marcus said, his tone shifting to a more professional, guarded cadence. It is a commercial equipment and working capital facility, opened roughly 7 months ago. The primary business listed is the Yard House Social LLC. You are listed as the primary personal guarantor. Hearing the name of Mason's restaurant spoken aloud by a debt collector was a surreal, sickening experience. I did not authorize this, I said firmly. I have no ownership stake in the Yard House Social. I did not sign any documents, electronic or otherwise, agreeing to guarantee this loan. I understand this is concerning, Ms. Caldwell, Marcus said smoothly. However, I am looking at the origination file right now. The application was completed online. It contains your full personal details, including your current employer, your gross annual income, and your banking history. The electronic signature was verified via an email confirmation link. What email address received that link? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Marcus hesitated. I can only provide partial information for security purposes, but it was a Gmail account beginning with the letters DCALD. DCALD, David Caldwell, my father. They hadn't even bothered to create a sophisticated fake email. They had used my father's primary personal email address to intercept the electronic signature verification for a loan taken out in my name. They had filled out the application using the W-2 forms I had absent-mindedly left in their home office last tax season when their printer was working and mine wasn't. They had packaged my financial stability and sold it to a commercial lender to buy custom bar stools and industrial refrigerators for my brother. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping an octave, settling into a cold, hard authority. That email address belongs to my father. I am the victim of identity theft. I need to formally dispute this account, and I need a complete copy of the origination file, including the IP address of the device used to sign the documents, mailed to my physical address immediately. Marcus's tone changed instantly, shifting from debt collector to liability management. I understand. I am flagging this account for a fraud investigation right now. We will send you an identity theft affidavit that must be notarized and returned. We will also mail the requested documentation to the address on file. Please note that the address on file is a Maplewood Drive address. That is my parents' house, I said. You will need to update my mailing address to my current residence. I am providing it now. I gave him my apartment address, ensuring the paperwork would come directly to me. Before I hung up, I asked one last question. Marcus, the credit report indicated the account is 30 days past due. What is the current outstanding balance? The current principal balance is $48,240, Marcus replied. The monthly payment of $1,400 was missed last month. If it is not paid within 15 days, it will move to 60 days delinquent, which will severely impact the guarantor's credit rating. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I will await the affidavit. I ended the call and set the phone on the coffee table. $48,000. My parents had anchored me to nearly $50,000 of high-interest commercial debt. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. I titled it "The Cost of Being Fine." The unauthorized loan was the catastrophic event, but my intuition told me it wasn't the first time they had used me. The loan was just the final, desperate escalation. I needed to look at the history of my willing contributions. For years, I had transferred money to them under the guise of family emergencies. I needed to know exactly where that money went. I logged into my checking account. I pulled the transaction history for the past 3 years, filtering for outgoing transfers to my parents' joint account. The list populated. There were 14 separate transfers. I exported the list to my spreadsheet and began the meticulous, painful process of cross-referencing. I started with the most recent transfer, the one from just a few weeks ago before the accident. April 12th, $3,000. Reason given by father, emergency furnace replacement. I opened another tab and logged into my Instagram account. I didn't follow Mason's business page closely, but I searched for the Yard House social. I scrolled back through their timeline to mid-April. There it was, a post dated April 15th, 3 days after I sent the money. It was a photo of Mason standing in front of a massive, gleaming stainless steel commercial oven being unloaded from a delivery truck. Caption: "The heart of the kitchen has arrived. Huge thanks to our investors for making the final deposit happen so we could secure delivery this week. Getting closer to opening. Yard House Social Columbus Eats." I stared at the photo. There was no furnace emergency. My $3,000 had paid for the final deposit on his commercial oven. I moved down the spreadsheet to the next large sum. September 8th, previous year, $3,200. Reason given by mother: unexpected medical deductible for dad's dental surgery. I pulled up my text message history with my mother, scrolling back to September of the previous year. I found the messages where she claimed the insurance had denied a bone graft procedure and they needed cash immediately. I had sent it without hesitation. I then searched my family email inbox, looking for anything related to Mason from that same week. I found an email from Mason to the entire family, dated September 10th. Subject: liquor license approved. Body: just wanted to share the good news. We officially secured the municipal liquor license today. The city fees were brutal, just over $3,000, but Mom and Dad came through clutch to help cover the final licensing costs. We are fully legal to pour. I typed the data into the spreadsheet. The $3,200 medical deductible was actually the municipal liquor license fee. I spent 4 hours going through every single transfer. The $4,800 roof repair in May was actually the deposit for the custom leather booths. The $1,500 property tax shortfall was actually a consultation fee for their interior designer. The $2,200 auto repair for my mother's car was used to cover Mason's personal rent when he quit his sales job to focus on the restaurant full-time. Out of the 14 transfers totaling $29,400, I could directly link 11 of them to Mason's restaurant expenses or personal living costs. I had funded my own erasure. Every time I worked an overtime shift, every time I delayed putting money into my townhouse fund, every time I felt a brief flash of pride that my parents trusted me enough to ask for help, I was just acting as a shadow investor for the golden child. My parents had built an entire ecosystem of lies to extract resources from the daughter they deemed too capable to need them. They didn't hate me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires seeing the other person as an equal adversary. My parents simply viewed me as a utility. I was a natural resource to be mined when the preferred child ran low on capital. I saved the spreadsheet. I closed the laptop. My physical therapist arrived an hour later. She was a brisk, efficient woman named Brenda, who pushed me through a series of painful leg lifts and core stabilization exercises. Every movement sent shockwaves of fire through my pinned pelvis. I gritted my teeth, gripping the arms of the couch until my knuckles turned white. "You're doing great, Erin," Brenda said, writing notes on her clipboard. "You have a very high pain tolerance." Most patients with this level of trauma are crying during these exercises. "I'm used to handling things," I breathed out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Over the next week, my physical recovery progressed at an agonizingly slow pace. I learned how to pivot from the couch to the walker without putting pressure on my right leg. I learned how to stand at the kitchen counter long enough to make a sandwich. Naomi transitioned to dropping by every other evening, amazed at my stoic determination to regain my independence. What Naomi didn't know was that my physical rehabilitation was mirroring my financial preparation. Every agonizing step with the walker was matched by a deliberate, calculated move to dismantle my parents' access to my life. The identity theft affidavit arrived in the mail from Apex Commercial Capital. I arranged for a mobile notary to come to the apartment. I swore under penalty of perjury that I had not authorized the loan, signed the document, and sent it back via certified mail. I also filed a formal report with the Federal Trade Commission, generating an official identity theft report. I wasn't pressing criminal charges yet. I wanted to hold that card in reserve, but I was building an ironclad administrative wall. Then, on day 12 of my recovery, the pressure test arrived. I was sitting at the kitchen island on a high stool, icing my hip, when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed. David Caldwell. I let it ring 3 times. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold calm wash over me. Then I answered, "Hello? Erin, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" My father's voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with a jovial, manufactured warmth. "I'm managing," I said neutrally. "The physical therapy is difficult, but I'm making progress." "How is Mason's wrist?" "Oh, he's doing okay," my father said quickly, eager to move past the medical pleasantries. "The cast is a nuisance, but he's pushing through. Actually, that's sort of why I'm calling. The restaurant is hitting the final stretch. We're looking at a soft opening in 3 weeks." "That's great news," I said, my voice deadpan. It really is. But you know how these commercial projects are. The final inspections and vendor payments always end up costing 20% more than you budget for. He let out a practiced, self-deprecating chuckle. "We've hit a slight cash flow bottleneck. Nothing serious, just a timing issue with the working capital." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch over the line, forcing him to fill the void. "Anyway," he continued, clearing his throat slightly when I didn't offer a bailout, "we're restructuring some of the existing vendor financing to free up some liquid cash for the opening week payroll. It's a standard procedure. But because your name is tangentially associated with one of the initial equipment files, you might receive an email today or tomorrow from a company called Apex Capital." There it was. The loan was 30 days past due. Apex had likely frozen the credit line or demanded a signature to restructure the debt to prevent default, and because I had locked down my credit and changed my security questions, my parents couldn't simply log in and electronically forge my signature again. They had hit the wall I built. "Tangentially associated?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Right, just a clerical thing." My father breezed past the question. "They're just doing a routine compliance check on the guarantor file. If you see an email from them with a DocuSign link, just go ahead and click approve. It won't take 2 minutes. It just keeps the gears turning so Mason doesn't lose his delivery slot for the bar inventory. He was asking me to validate the fraudulent loan. He was asking me to legally bind myself to $48,000 of debt, presenting it as a casual favor, like asking me to water his plants while he was out of town. "Dad," I said, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, "did you use my social security number to open a $65,000 commercial loan for Mason's restaurant?" The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. The jovial salesman persona vanished instantly. For 10 long seconds, all I could hear was the faint sound of his breathing. When he finally spoke, his tone was completely different. It was defensive, practical, and utterly devoid of guilt. "Erin, you need to understand the situation we were in," he said, his voice dropping into a low, serious register. "Mason was up against a hard deadline with the equipment distributor. Your mother and I had already leveraged our home equity as far as the bank would allow. We needed a bridge facility. Your credit is pristine, and you have no debt. You were the only logical option." "The logical option," I repeated. "You committed identity theft because it was logical." "Do not use that kind of language," he snapped, his authority flaring up. "Identity theft is a crime committed by strangers. This is family business. We are paying the loan. We just missed one payment because of the accident, which threw everything into chaos. We have every intention of paying it off completely once the restaurant is generating revenue." "You didn't ask me." "Because we knew you would say no," he fired back, completely revealing his hand. "You've always been so rigid about your savings, Erin. You don't understand what it takes to build a business. Mason has a real shot at something huge here, and he just needed a little support. We used your profile temporarily. It hasn't cost you a single dime." The sheer magnitude of his entitlement was breathtaking. He truly believed that my financial stability was a family asset, a resource he was entitled to manage, because he deemed my brother's needs more important than my consent. "It hasn't cost me a dime," I said quietly, looking at the spreadsheet still minimized on my laptop screen, "except for the $3,000 for the furnace that bought a commercial oven. And the $3,200 for your dental surgery that bought a liquor license, and the $4,800 for the roof that bought leather booths." The silence returned, heavier this time. "You've been checking your accounts," he said finally, his voice tight. "I've had a lot of free time sitting on this couch, Dad. Since you haven't been here, I decided to occupy myself by mapping out exactly how much of my future you cannibalized to build Mason's. Erin, be reasonable. We can sit down and talk about all of this. We will pay you back every cent once the yard house is profitable. But right now, I need you to sign that Apex document. If they freeze that credit line, the vendors pull out, the opening is delayed, and we lose everything. Your mother and I will lose our retirement. Mason will be bankrupt. You have to sign it." He wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding. He was utilizing the ultimate emotional leverage, the threat of total family destruction, placing the entire burden of their survival squarely on my broken shoulders. Before the accident, I would have broken. I would have felt the crushing weight of guilt. I would have believed that my ability to absorb the damage meant it was my duty to do so. But I looked down at the metal brace stabilizing my shattered pelvis. I remembered waking up in the ICU, alone in the dark, while they sat with a grown man who had a concussion. I remembered the nurse's pitying look. Being capable does not create an obligation to absorb everyone else's consequences. "No," I said. "Erin, did you hear what I just said?" "If you don't sign that paper—" "I heard you, Dad," I interrupted, my voice as hard and unyielding as the pins in my bones. "But I didn't get an email from Apex. I won't be getting an email from Apex. Because 3 days ago I formally disputed the account as fraudulent. I submitted a notarized identity theft affidavit. The account is frozen, and my credit is locked." "You did what?" His voice spiked, a genuine note of panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "Erin, are you out of your mind? You're triggering a fraud investigation against your own parents. They could call the police. They could pull the entire financing package. Then you should have thought of that before you forged my signature," I said. "You are destroying your brother's life over a technicality," he shouted. "We are a family, we help each other." "No, Dad," I said calmly. "You and Mom help Mason. I am just the bank you robbed to do it. But the bank is closed." "Erin, do not hang up this phone, you listen to me." I pressed the red end call button. I set the phone down on the counter. My hands were shaking, a delayed physical reaction to the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation. I had done it. I had drawn the boundary in wet cement, and now it was hardening. My phone immediately began to vibrate. Incoming call. Marlene Caldwell. I declined it. A moment later, a text message came through from my mother. "Erin, your father just told me what you did. I am in tears." "How can you be so vindictive? We are coming over there right now. We need to sort this out as a family. Do not lock us out." I stared at the text. They were coming over. The illusion of distance was gone. They were going to bring the full weight of their emotional manipulation to my front door. They were going to try to force me back into my designated role. They thought that because I was physically broken, stuck in an apartment with a walker, I would eventually submit to their pressure. They thought the family meeting would break me. I slowly pivoted off the kitchen stool, gripping the handles of my walker. I dragged myself back toward the living room, every step a painful, deliberate choice. I picked up my phone and opened my contact list. I found Naomi's number. "I know you're at work," I texted, "but my parents are on their way here. I'm not going to let them in, but I need you to know I'm changing my emergency contact at the hospital officially tomorrow. It's going to be you." Naomi replied 30 seconds later. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't open the door until I arrive. You're not doing this alone." I looked at the locked deadbolt on my front door. My parents were about to arrive, expecting to find the responsible daughter they could bully into submission. They expected to find the girl who would quietly absorb their financial ruin just to keep the peace. They were about to find out that the daughter they relied on was gone, and the woman who replaced her was keeping the receipts. 15 minutes passed in absolute silence. The apartment felt entirely still, the air thick and heavy with anticipation. Then a quick rhythmic knock sounded at my door. 2 short taps, a pause, and one more. It was the knock Naomi used at the hospital when she came into my room to check my vitals. I gripped the aluminum handles of my walker and pulled myself up from the kitchen stool. Pain flared instantly in my right hip, a sharp, grinding reminder of my shattered pelvis, but I ignored it. I made my way to the door and turned the deadbolt. Naomi stepped inside, her scrub slightly wrinkled from a long shift. She dropped her tote bag by the entryway and took one look at my face. She did not ask if I was okay. She could see that I was operating on pure adrenaline. "Where do you want to do this?" she asked, her voice completely calm and professional. "The living room," I said, leaning heavily on the walker as I turned around. "I want them to have to walk all the way inside. I want them to be in my space, and Naomi, I need you to just sit in the kitchen. Do not intervene unless they refuse to leave. I have to do this myself." Naomi nodded, understanding perfectly. She walked into the kitchen, pulled out one of the high stools, and sat down with her arms crossed. She was my witness. She was my silent backup. She was the physical proof that I was no longer isolated. Less than 5 minutes later, a much louder, aggressive knock hit the door. The wood rattled in its frame. My father did not believe in soft arrivals. I stood in the center of the living room, my weight entirely supported by my left leg and the walker. I had my laptop open on the coffee table next to the stack of printed documents from Apex Commercial Capital. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate. "It is open," I called out, my voice clear and unwavering. The door swung open, hitting the rubber stopper on the baseboard. My father walked in first. He was wearing his usual weekend golf polo, but his face was flushed a dark, angry red. My mother followed right behind him, wringing her hands together, her face pulled into an expression of exaggerated, frantic worry. And then Mason walked in. I felt a slight jolt of surprise. I had not expected them to bring him. Mason was wearing a dark gray sweater, his left arm encased in a thick fiberglass cast supported by a sling. He looked pale, exhausted, and deeply confused. He closed the door behind them, his eyes scanning the apartment before landing on me. He took a step forward, his brow furrowed in genuine concern. "Erin," Mason said, his voice hesitant. "Mom and Dad said you were having some kind of financial crisis. They said you were threatening to pull the plug on the restaurant opening. What is going on? My father immediately stepped in front of Mason, cutting him off before I could answer. He wanted to control the narrative. He wanted to establish dominance in the room immediately. "We are not doing this standing up," my father said, waving a hand toward the couch. "Erin, sit down. You are hurt. You need to be resting, not throwing a hysterical fit over a clerical error. We are going to talk this through like rational adults." "I prefer to stand," I said softly. I did not move. I did not offer them a seat. I just looked at him. My father paused, clearly thrown by my refusal to obey a direct command. He looked around the living room and finally noticed Naomi sitting quietly in the kitchen shadows. He bristled, his posture stiffening. "Who is she?" My father demanded, pointing a finger toward the kitchen. "This is family business, Erin. We do not need an audience. Tell your friend to leave." "Naomi is my emergency contact," I said calmly. "She stays. If you do not want an audience for this conversation, you are free to walk back out that door. But if you stay, she stays." My mother pushed past my father, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I shifted my weight back, forcing her to grasp empty air. "Erin, sweetheart, please," my mother pleaded, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "You are breaking our hearts. Your father is under so much stress, and Mason is trying so hard to keep his dream alive. We came here to apologize if we made you feel left out, but you have to understand the pressure we are under. You cannot dispute that loan. You just cannot do it." Mason stepped forward again, his confusion morphing into alarm. "What loan? Mom, what is she talking about? What loan did Erin dispute?" My father turned to Mason, holding up a hand to silence him. "It is nothing, Mason. It is just a bridge facility we set up to cover the final equipment invoices. It is a temporary holdover until the revenue starts coming in. Erin is just overreacting to the paperwork." I looked at my brother. For the first time in 30 years, I saw him not as the golden child, but as a pawn in their game. They had coddled him, protected him, and funded him, but they had also kept him completely ignorant of the true cost of his life. "It is not a temporary holdover," I said, directing my words entirely to Mason. 7 months ago, Dad and Mom took out a $65,000 commercial loan for the Yard House Social. They did it entirely online. They used my social security number, my banking history, and my annual income to qualify for it. They forged my electronic signature by intercepting the verification link using Dad's email address. "I am the primary personal guarantor for the debt that bought your commercial kitchen." Mason stared at me, all the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the dim light of my living room. He looked at my father, then back to me, shaking his head slowly. "No," Mason whispered. "No, that is impossible. Dad told me he found an angel investor from his old sales territory. He told me the financing was totally separate from the family. He said it was a private equity deal." "There is no angel investor, Mason," I said quietly. "There is just me. This is ridiculous," my father shouted, stepping toward me, his voice booming off the walls. "Erin, you are spinning this into a malicious attack. We did not steal from you. You have a pristine credit profile that was sitting entirely unused. You live in a cheap apartment. You do not have a mortgage. We utilized an idle family asset to secure the future of this family. We were going to pay it off completely. It was a victimless strategy." "A victimless strategy," I repeated, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. I reached down to the coffee table and picked up the stack of printed papers. I held them out to my father. "The account is 30 days past due, Dad. The outstanding balance is $48,000. If I had not caught this, my credit would have been destroyed in 15 days. I would have lost my chance to buy a home. I would have been legally responsible for a restaurant I do not even own." My father did not take the papers. He just glared at me, his jaw set in a hard line of absolute defiance. He genuinely did not believe he had done anything wrong. He believed that his authority as the patriarch gave him the right to redistribute my stability to cover his son's failures. "You were never going to pay for it," my father spat out, completely abandoning his jovial manipulation. "We had it under control. We missed one payment because we were sitting in a hospital waiting room, praying that Mason did not have brain bleeding. We prioritized our child's life over a vendor payment." Mason had a mild concussion, Dad, I said, my voice dropping into a cold clinical register. I had a lacerated spleen and a crushed pelvis. I almost died on the operating table while you were sitting in the observation unit holding his good hand. Do not talk to me about prioritizing a child's life. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands. How can you be so cruel? We were terrified. We love you both equally, Erin. We just thought you were strong enough to handle being alone for a few hours. You have always been so independent. I was independent because you forced me to be, I said, looking at my mother. The anger I expected to feel was not there. I just felt a profound, exhausting sadness. You did not leave me alone because I was strong. You left me alone because you did not want to deal with me. You only wanted me when I could provide something. I turned my attention back to Mason. He was standing perfectly still, his eyes locked on the printed documents in my hand. Mason, I said softly. The unauthorized loan was just the end of it. Do you remember the liquor license fee you needed last September? The $3,000 you thought Mom and Dad gave you from their savings? Mason swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Yes, Mom told me Dad needed emergency dental surgery, I said. I transferred them $3,200 the same day they gave you the money for the license. What about the custom leather booths you ordered in May? Dad said. He cashed out some old stock options, Mason whispered, his voice cracking. He told me the roof was leaking and they needed an emergency repair, I replied. I picked up the printed spreadsheet and held it out to him. I went back through 3 years of bank transfers. Every time they told me they had a financial emergency, the money went directly into your business or your rent. They used my empathy to fund your restaurant. You were building your dream on my stolen money. Mason reached out with his good hand. His fingers were trembling so violently he could barely grasp the paper. He pulled the spreadsheet toward him and stared at the lines of data. The dates, the amounts, the matching excuses. I watched him read it. I watched the entire narrative of his life shatter into pieces right there in my living room. Mason had always believed he was special. He believed he was a brilliant entrepreneur who just needed a little push from his devoted parents. He was looking at the undeniable proof that he was a financial parasite, and that his parents were the ones attaching him to his sister's veins. Dad, Mason said. His voice was no longer confused. It was low, thick, with a rising, suffocating shame. He looked up from the paper, his eyes locking onto our father. Did you do this? Did you take her money and tell me it was yours? Did you take out a loan in her name? My father puffed out his chest, his face turning a darker shade of red. He was cornered, and like any cornered animal, he went on the attack. I did what I had to do to protect this family. My father roared. I protected our investments. Your sister sits on a pile of cash playing it safe while the rest of us take risks to build real wealth. I am the head of this family, and I make the financial decisions to ensure everyone survives. If she had just signed the extension document today, none of this would be happening. She is the one destroying your business right now. Mason took a step back, looking at our father as if he were looking at a complete stranger. She is not destroying my business, Mason said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You built my business on fraud. You stole from her. You stole her identity. You lied to me every single day for 2 years. Mason, please, my mother cried, reaching out to touch his good arm. We did it for you. We wanted you to succeed so badly. We just wanted you to have your restaurant. Mason pulled his arm away from her touch violently. I did not want a restaurant if it meant robbing my own sister. How could you do this to her? How could you sit with me in the hospital knowing you had 50 grand of unauthorized debt sitting on her head while she was in surgery? The room fell into a stunned silence. Mason's outburst had completely broken the family dynamic. The golden child was not defending the system. He was tearing it down. My father stared at Mason, his chest heaving. The realization that he had lost control of his favored son hit him harder than my defiance ever could. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a pure, unadulterated venom. You vindictive little bitch, my father hissed, dropping the facade of the caring parent completely. You planned this. You waited until we were backed into a corner, and now you are trying to burn us to the ground because you have always been jealous of him. You have always resented the attention he gets. I did not flinch, I did not raise my voice. I leaned slightly heavier on my walker and looked him dead in the eye. I am not jealous of Mason, I said evenly. I actually pity him. Because he has to wake up tomorrow and realize his entire life is a fiction you created, and you have to wake up tomorrow and realize you have no one left to steal from. The dispute with Apex is filed. The identity theft affidavit is notarized and in the mail. My credit is locked. The bank is closed, Dad. Now get out of my apartment. My father stood frozen for a second, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to hit me. He looked like he wanted to physically force me to pick up the phone and cancel the fraud investigation. But he looked past me and saw Naomi standing up in the kitchen, her hand resting near the heavy ceramic knife block on the counter. You are going to regret this, Erin, my father promised, his voice a low, ugly growl. When the restaurant goes under, when we lose everything we invested, that is on you. You are dead to this family. You killed me a long time ago, I replied quietly. I am just finally refusing to pay for the funeral. My father turned on his heel and stormed toward the door. He ripped it open and walked out into the hallway without looking back. My mother stood there for a moment, sobbing openly, looking between me and Mason. Mason, come with us, she pleaded. Let's go home, we can figure this out. Mason did not look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. I am not going anywhere with you. Go away, Mom. My mother let out one final, agonizing wail, a sound of absolute defeat, before she turned and scurried out the door after my father. The apartment door clicked shut. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Mason stood in the center of the living room, staring blankly at the printed spreadsheet still clutched in his trembling hand. He looked entirely broken. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion hit me. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving behind a deep, throbbing agony in my pelvis. My arms shook as they supported my weight on the walker. Naomi stepped out of the kitchen and walked over to me. She gently placed a hand on my back. Let's get you to the couch, she said softly. I nodded, allowing her to guide me backward until I collapsed onto the cushions. I closed my eyes, focusing on taking deep, slow breaths. Mason finally looked up. He walked slowly over to the coffee table and placed the spreadsheet down next to the Apex documents. He looked at me, his eyes hollow and devastated. I did not know, Erin, he whispered. I swear to God I did not know they were doing this to you. I know you didn't, I said, keeping my eyes closed. But you know now. Mason stood there for another long moment. He did not ask for my forgiveness. He did not ask me to fix it. He just nodded slowly, acknowledging the reality of what our parents had done. He turned and walked to the front door. He let himself out quietly, closing the door softly behind him. The climax was over. The family I had known was gone. But as I lay on the couch, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and feeling the solid presence of Naomi sitting in the chair across from me, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. I felt safe. The fallout over the next 2 months was systematic and brutal. The administrative gears of the financial system turned slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Once my notarized identity theft affidavit was received by Apex Commercial Capital, their fraud department opened a full investigation. I provided them with everything they asked for. I gave them the IP addresses, the email correspondence, and a copy of the police report I filed for documentation purposes. Because I had caught the fraud early and locked down my credit, the burden of proof shifted away from me. Apex quickly determined that the electronic signature did not originate from my devices or IP addresses, and the email confirmation had bounced through my father's personal account. Within 45 days, the $65,000 commercial loan was completely scrubbed from my Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion credit reports. My credit score rebounded immediately, climbing back up to 770. I was administratively cleared of the debt. My parents were not so lucky. When Apex realized the primary guarantor was fraudulent, they immediately froze the working capital line for the Yard House Social. They demanded immediate repayment of the dispersed funds or a valid guarantor to assume the debt. My parents, who were already maxed out on their home equity lines and personal credit cards, could not secure alternative financing. Without the working capital, the restaurant opening stalled completely. Vendors who were owed final payments refused to deliver the inventory. The commercial landlord, realizing the tenant was defaulting before the doors even opened, initiated eviction proceedings for breach of lease. I learned the details through Aunt Susan, who occasionally texted me updates before I finally blocked her number. She told me that Mason's business partner walked away from the project, abandoning the LLC to protect himself. The restaurant went into receivership. The custom leather booths, the industrial ovens, and the bar stools my parents had bought with my stolen money were repossessed by the creditors and auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. My parents faced total financial ruin. They were legally on the hook for the personal guarantees they had actually signed on the commercial lease and the early equipment orders. To avoid bankruptcy, they were forced to liquidate my father's retirement accounts, taking massive tax penalties in the process. When that wasn't enough to satisfy the creditors, they put my childhood home on the market. They sold the house on Maplewood Drive in late July. They downsized to a small, cramped apartment in a cheaper suburb 30 miles outside the city. My father had to delay his planned retirement indefinitely. My mother had to take on extra shifts at the dental office. They tried to contact me multiple times during this period. They sent long, rambling emails swinging wildly between furious accusations that I had destroyed their lives and pathetic pleas for me to co-sign a new personal loan to help them with moving expenses. I routed their emails to a hidden folder and never replied. They had made their choices and they were finally paying the cost. As for my own recovery, it was slow, painful, and entirely mine. I spent 12 weeks doing intensive physical therapy. I graduated from the aluminum walker to a single cane and eventually to walking unassisted. I returned to work at the hospital on light duty, focusing on chart reviews and patient intake before finally being cleared for full floor shifts. My savings had taken a hit from my medical deductible and lost wages, but because my credit was intact, my plan to buy a home was delayed, not destroyed. I did not hear from Mason for 4 months. I assumed he had retreated back into my parents' orbit, letting them soothe his bruised ego and blame me for the collapses of his dreams. But in late September, I received a text message from an unknown number. "It is Mason. I changed my number. Could you meet me for coffee? Just 30 minutes. I won't ask you for anything." I thought about it for 2 days before replying with the address of a small cafe near the hospital. When I walked into the cafe on a crisp Tuesday afternoon, I almost didn't recognize him. The charismatic, flashy entrepreneur was gone. Mason was wearing a plain blue polo shirt with a company logo on the chest and worn jeans. His cast was off, but he held his left wrist stiffly. He looked thinner, and the easy arrogance that used to define his posture had been replaced by a quiet, grounded humility. I sat down across from him. He had already ordered me a black coffee. "Thank you for coming," Mason said, keeping his hands wrapped around his own mug. "How are you, Mason?" I asked neutrally. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "I am surviving. I got a job as an operations manager for a regional logistics company. It is basically managing warehouse inventory and delivery routes. It pays $60,000 a year. No equity, no glamour. But it pays the rent on my studio apartment." "You have your own apartment?" I asked, genuinely surprised. He nodded. "I moved out of Mom and Dad's place 2 weeks after the meeting at your apartment. I haven't spoken to them since." I took a sip of my coffee, waiting for him to explain. After that day, Mason continued, his voice steady but quiet. "I went home and looked at all the paperwork, the LLC formation, the lease agreements, the vendor contracts. I realized that almost nothing I built was actually mine. It was all funded by their manipulation and your stability. They didn't believe in my business, Erin. They just believed in playing the savior, and they used you to fund the illusion." He looked up at me, his eyes clear and incredibly sad. "I spent my whole life thinking I was the special one," Mason said. "I thought I was the one destined for great things, but I was just the excuse they used to abuse you. I let them do it because I was too lazy and too arrogant to question where the money was coming from. I am sorry, Erin. I am profoundly, deeply sorry, for all of it." He didn't offer excuses. He didn't tell me he was concussed. He didn't beg me to forgive him so he could feel better about himself. He just sat there and took full accountability for his role in the system. Thank you, Mason, I said softly. I appreciate you saying that. I am going to pay you back, he said, pulling a folded check from his pocket and sliding it across the table. This is for the $3,000 you sent for the furnace. I know it is a drop in the bucket compared to what they took from you over the years, but I am setting aside a portion of every paycheck. I am going to return every dollar you sent them that ended up in my accounts. It might take me 5 years, but I am going to do it. I looked at the check. It was drawn from his own personal account. It was the first piece of real, unmanipulated responsibility I had ever seen my brother take. You don't have to do this, I said. The debt was theirs. I do have to do this, Mason said firmly. For me, I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet without standing on your neck. We sat and talked for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. We were practically strangers trying to learn how to speak to each other without our parents acting as a toxic translator. But when we parted ways outside the cafe, we hugged briefly. It felt tentative, but it felt real. 10 months after the accident, the Columbus winter finally broke, giving way to a bright, mild spring. I was walking without a cane now. On cold mornings, my right hip would ache with a dull, persistent throb, a permanent physical reminder of the crash. But it was manageable. It was a scar I had earned by surviving. My credit had fully stabilized, and my savings had recovered just enough for a down payment. I didn't buy the $300,000 luxury property I had originally looked at before the accident. I didn't want to stretch myself thin. Instead, I bought a modest 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet neighborhood near the hospital. It had a small garden patio and large windows that let in the afternoon light. It was perfectly within my means, and it was entirely mine. On my second weekend in the new house, I hosted a small housewarming gathering. It was a quiet affair. A few nurses from my shift came by with a bottle of wine. Naomi was there, of course, organizing the appetizers in my new kitchen as if she owned the place. She had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, proving that family is not defined by blood, but by who actually shows up when the world falls apart. The doorbell rang at 3 in the afternoon. I opened it to find Mason standing on the porch. He was holding a small, potted snake plant. It was a cheap, resilient plant that required very little maintenance, the exact kind of practical gift I appreciated. "Hey," Mason said, smiling slightly. "Congratulations on the house, Erin. It looks great from the outside." "Thanks for coming, Mason," I said, stepping back to let him in. "Come on back to the kitchen. Naomi made way too much food." He walked in, looking around the modest living room. He didn't comment on the size or compare it to the grand plans he used to have for himself. He just genuinely seemed happy to be there. He handed me the plant, grabbed a plate of food, and spent the next hour chatting amiably with my coworkers about hospital logistics and supply chain issues. He didn't take up all the oxygen in the room. He was just a normal guy, living a normal life. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, and Mason had helped me take the trash out to the curb, I stood alone in my new kitchen. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the refrigerator. I walked over to the fridge and looked at the white magnetic whiteboard I had hung on the door. It was a habit I picked up during my recovery, a place to write down important reminders and grocery lists. In the top corner, there was a section printed in bold black letters: Emergency Information. Under Primary Emergency Contact, I had written Naomi Brooks. Under Secondary Emergency Contact, I had written Mason Caldwell. My parents' names were nowhere to be found. They did not have my new address. They did not know my new phone number. They were entirely excised from my life. I touched the smooth surface of the whiteboard, tracing the letters of Naomi's name. For most of my life, being the strong one meant that everyone else got to fall apart, and I got handed the bill. I used to think that strength meant surviving the betrayal without complaining. I thought it meant absorbing the pain, suppressing the anger, and proving my worth by never asking for anything in return. I know better now. Strength is not about how much damage you can silently endure to protect people who do not value you. Strength is knowing when the cost of the relationship is simply too high to pay. It is the ability to look at the people who raised you, recognize that their love is conditional on your exploitation, and deciding to close the bank anyway. I am 31 years old. I live in a modest house that I own. I work hard, I pay my own bills, and I am surrounded only by people who choose to respect my boundaries. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see the responsible daughter who always figures it out so others don't have to. I see a woman who finally figured out how to protect herself. I am completely independent, not because they forced me to be, but because I chose to be. And for the first time in my entire life, I am breathing easy.